Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week starts a brand new month, which means it's time for the next issue of Spawn. Spawn number 17 to be precise. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 1994, we can see here that this is actually a pretty cool cover. We're now officially in the Capullo era of Spawn. I like what Greg has done with this. My only complaint is that the image that he drew for the cover of this book has literally nothing to do with what's going on in the story of this book. There's absolutely no point in the story in which Spawn appears in a sewer. This is literally just, hey, I thought this would be a cool pinup for the cover. And it is. It just, I always find it a little bit weird when like the cover has nothing to do with the story of the issue. It's just kind of a weird little pet peeve of mine. Story, Grant Morrison. Pencils, Greg Capullo. Inks, Mark Pennington. Copy editor and letterer, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff and Alley Optics. We see here on the first page a shot of the Earth from outer space, and then the maniacal laughing image of Mabulja coming out from the darkness of space with his hand reaching around the Earth. I guess sort of giving the impression of him being a supernatural creature that exists outside of time and space. In fact, the beginning little blurb at the top here even starts out saying somewhere in time, not somewhere in space, which is, I think, a good way of kind of explaining how Mabulja and the other demons / angels and what have you all kind of exist in a different level of reality or level of existence than the physical world. We see here that he is laughing, and it's because he's gazing upon Spawn, who has just unearthed the body of Al Simmons from its grave and is now stuck in a moment of torment as he's not certain what's happening or how any of this is possible. And we see him start to descend into a level of like depression and not quite madness, but a lack of understanding as to what's happening to him and how all of this has gone down. We then see Mabulja's hand reach down from the sky and grab Spawn up as he is still clinging to the body of Al Simmons. Mabulja then basically explains to Spawn that his body that he is occupying currently is not the same body that he had on Earth, which I'm not certain exactly how all of that works because it's not really explained in any kind of like detail. He then transports Spawn from Arlington National Cemetery, where Al is buried, to Simmonsville, which is in the Nevada desert near a military testing site. We first discovered Simmonsville in the last issue, where we were told that it was created using a substance called psychoplasm, as this installation sits directly on top of a gateway to hell. And because this psychoplasm was exposed to Spawn, it is manifested itself in all of Al Simmons' memories of his life. As Mabulja sets Spawn down, he notices that he's on the street he grew up on, and then that he's next to the church that he and Wanda got married in, and then looks out over a lake where he sees himself as Al Simmons rowing a boat with Wanda and remembers that's where he proposed to her. He then yells at Mabulja to leave Wanda out of this, but Mabulja just laughs and states that every single moment that Spawn is on Earth brings him one step closer to being fully under Mabulja's control, and essentially that, you know, Spawn has no way of ever hoping to defeat Mabulja or try and escape his grasp, and that he needs to just accept the inevitability that he will forever be a slave to the Mabulja's army. Meanwhile, on the space station hovering above Earth that the Angels are now in control of, they have completed the creation of the anti-spawn and have decided to launch it down to Earth so that it can destroy the Hellspawn. And this is one of the parts of this story I still don't fully understand. It seems like there's quite a few plot holes here. Like, for instance, these two astronauts have basically been possessed by angels. I don't know why that is exactly. I don't know why the angels couldn't have just taken over the space station without inhabiting their bodies. Also, I don't really understand why they needed a living human to create the anti-spawn. As we saw in the last issue, the anti-spawn is none other than Jason Wynn, who was Al Simmons, aka Spawn's former advisor and mentor and boss in the world of the living. And it just seems odd considering that all of the Hellspawns in Mabalja's army are basically created from souls which have been damned to hell. So you would assume that anti-spawns would come from souls that are in heaven, but for whatever reason, they're not. It's made of a real life living human being. And none of this is truly explained at this point, what the reasoning behind this is. I just feel like it's a lot of questions that are being presented to us in basically the lore of the story that Grant Morrison is kind of glossing over and not really giving us a better explanation of. Back on Earth, we see that Spawn is furious and yelling out to Mabalja that he's going to defeat him, that he's, he wants to find him, he wants to fight him. He screams out that he took his life and his soul, when suddenly there's a huge crack of energy behind him as the anti-Spawn collides into the Earth and then jumps up to its feet. Spawn realizes that something is very strange as he feels that his whole body is being electrified by static electricity, and that the figure that he sees in the explosion is one that is very powerful. As the dust settles and the smoke clears, we then get our first really good look at the anti-Spawn as he exclaims, "Hellspawn, I have come for you." Overall, I like the design of the anti-Spawn, except for the belt buckle. The belt buckle just seems, I don't know, completely out of place given the rest of the design of the anti-Spawn. Also, I like some of the touches that Greg put on this. For instance, on Spawn's little, I don't want to call them brass knuckles, but handguards, Spawn has 2 spikes, whereas the anti-Spawn has 3. Kind of just, the idea that, he's got more spikes on him. He's this, slight differences that are, where he's clearly a design that's inspired by the Hellspawn, but different in ways that would make him more deadly to the Hellspawn, I think is what he's trying to convey. Like I said, overall, it's a design I like. I just think this belt buckle is so stupid with the little Spawn symbol slash through it. It just seems out of place. Meanwhile, we are then teleported to the home of Terry Fitzgerald and his wife Wanda, who was formerly married to Spawn, as Terry is watching television and watching a bunch of news reports talking about the disappearance of Jason Wynn, as nobody knows where he's at or where he can be found and how he is missing public appearances. We then see our friend Thurston Burns once again linking this to conspiratorial things, as he is the quote-unquote firebrand of the news world in Spawn. And then Terry decides he's heard enough and switches the channel when Wanda walks into the room, as he doesn't want her hearing the reports that are now bringing up Al Simmons and the possibility of him being murdered. She states that she thought she heard them say something about Al, but Terry says that it was nothing. It's just because they're talking about Jason Wynn. Also, this is another point where it seems odd that Jason Wynn would have been the person that they chose to be the anti-Spawn, given that he was such a high-profile public figure, and for him to just suddenly disappear without a trace would potentially raise a lot of eyebrows. Not that the battle between heaven and hell necessarily needs to hide itself from humanity, but up until this point, it seems as though that they've kind of been doing that and not wanted to bring that battle to the forefront of humanity's knowledge and recognition. So if you were going to choose a person to be the anti-Spawn, would it not be a better idea to choose a person that no one would miss? I don't know. That just seems like one of those other weird plot points that's gotten thrown in here that Grant Morrison, I don't know if he didn't think it through or just, didn't feel like it was as important as I'm making it. We then see Wanda sit down on the couch next to Terry and basically start to talk about how she never liked Jason Wynn the few times she met him, that he always gave her the creeps. And Terry, without going into any real detail, kind of lets her know that those feelings were well founded, as Jason always had his hand in some really, you know, under the radar stuff that was very hush hush black ops type of stuff. And that despite he being involved in some, somewhat nefarious things, he always managed to keep his nose clean, which is probably what led to him and Jason having a falling out. Wanda then states that she finds it weird that she's been thinking about Al a lot more and that sometimes it feels like he's closer than ever. Of course, this is possibly because she's sensing the presence of Al, as Spawn has been interacting with Wanda and Terry without their knowledge. However, she kind of decides that it's something that she doesn't really need to worry about, and that she's also not terribly worried about Jason Wynn either, thinking that even if he has disappeared, it doesn't really matter. However, it matters more than she realizes, as we are transported then back to Simmonsville, where we see the anti-Spawn, aka Jason Wynn, facing off against Spawn, aka Al Simmons, outside of the church in Simmonsville. However, it states here that neither one of these men suspects that either one of them is who they really are, meaning that Jason only sees this as Spawn, and Spawn only sees this as anti-Spawn. They have no idea that they're actually fighting Jason Wynn and Al Simmons respectively. Which, again, kind of falls into this idea of like, why was Jason Wynn chosen? It would have made more sense if Jason knew that Spawn was Al Simmons and that he was actually going to be, essentially putting the final period on his ending of Al Simmons' life and then his afterlife. And then it also would have made more sense for Spawn to know that the anti-Spawn was Jason Wynn, and for him to finally have a chance to enact his revenge on Jason for giving the kill order on him. But now you just have these two guys facing off against each other without any knowledge of who each other are, and they're just fighting each other because they're fighting each other. We see that the anti-Spawn says he's here to destroy Spawn. Spawn tells him to go ahead and try, basically kind of glossing over the threat that's in front of him, believing that the anti-Spawn is no match for him. However, this is a take that he will soon come to regret, as the anti-Spawn unleashes his first attack of Holy Fire. The blast hits Spawn with a huge amount of force, the impact knocking him off of his feet and through the window of the church that he and Wanda got married in. He, in his thoughts, even says that it feels like he got hit by a freight train and that everything inside of him just caught on fire as he smashes through the glass window. Also, this is the first issue in which Spawn is drawn as having a more zombie-like face, where his nose is actually decayed off and is more of just a crater where a nose used to be. Even in the last issue that we looked at, issue 16, he still has a fully formed human-like nose, and then in this issue suddenly it's just gone. And I think this is kind of how Greg took to approaching the changes that he wanted to make to Spawn's design. He just made very slight, subtle changes, one issue at a time, before making the full change to the overall look of Spawn's costume, which is a smart way to do it. If he had just changed the look of Spawn right away, I think a lot of people would have been really upset about it. But in doing it incrementally the way that he did, it's almost unnoticeable until you go back and look at it issue by issue and see what he was doing, especially with the knowledge of the future and knowing where it was going to wind up. We see Spawn then fall down to the ground in the church as he collapses in a heap with glass sticking out of his face. And unfortunately, This is not a real church. This is a church made out of psychoplasm and a church that sits on top of a gateway to hell, which means that this church is actually filled with a lot of demons from the pit of hell who, by the way, just like the Violator and the Violator's brothers, do not like hell spawns because they believe that they are the rightful inhabitants of hell and should be the ones to fill the ranks of Imbolge's army when they decide to storm the gates of heaven. So they take it upon themselves that they're going to strip the costume off of Al Simmons, aka Spawn, and use it for themselves and basically take their rightful place as captains in Hell's army. However, the demons are interrupted when the anti-Spawn bursts through the doors of the church and orders them all to get away from Spawn because he belongs to him, and then states he's mine as he unleashes another huge blast of holy fire, which immediately torches all of the demons. Spawn starts to get to his feet, thinking that he can smell burning sulfur, and realizes just now how powerful the anti-Spawn is and wonders if this new adversary is in fact stronger than him. As we see the anti-Spawn, his hands still glowing with the light of the holy fire, stating that, witness how, or that he wants Spawn to witness how quickly and easily he is able to dispel the darkness and that Spawn's end is now upon him. And things are starting to look like they might not be as easy for Al as he believed they were at the beginning of this fight. Meanwhile, at the nearby military facility, we see Major Vale and an unnamed subordinate watching the chaos unfold in Simmonsville on a large monitor. Vale also wondering what happened to Jason Wynn, who is the person that brought him here in the first place to show him all these things, and basically try to secure more government funding to use this facility to figure out a way to use psychoplasm to military advantage for the U.S. Vale is starting to get very upset at what's happening in front of him, stating that, this gateway to hell is living up to its name as all hell seems to be breaking loose, and he is basically not going to stand for it, as he decides that he is going to go down to Simmonsville himself and stop this from happening. Oddly enough, I find this a weird choice on his part, as he is just a guy, and from what he has witnessed about the goings-on of Simmonsville, he should be a little bit more timid about just walking straight into this hell gateway that's, inhabited by demons that have already killed a few military officers. And by the way, there's just this giant flame battle happening right in the middle, but he just seems like he's determined that he's just going to walk right in there and stop everything on a moment's notice. Back in the church, we see that Spawn takes another hit as he falls face first into the ground. He realizes, however, though, that he has to start fighting back if he wants to survive this encounter. So he jumps back up to his feet and unleashes a burst of necro energy. However, the anti-Spawn dodges out of the way and immediately goes on a counteroffensive, and Spawn realizes that this fight is not going well for him and that his adversary is not going to let up. As the anti-Spawn charges up for another attack, Spawn realizes that he cannot take another assault and decides that his best approach at this point would be to retreat, so he decides to teleport, as we see him once again turn into a weird little ball of necro energy or plasm or whatever, and teleport at light speed away from the church in Simmonsville back to the alleyways of the Bowery amongst the homeless people that he lives with. And as he starts to reappear, he quickly tells them that they all have to get away because the anti-Spawn may be able to follow him. The men, however, seem confused and just think that Spawn looks like he's in bad shape and wondering what they can do to help their friend. However, he screams at them to go. Unfortunately, they are all cut off when another ball of energy starts to appear right next to Spawn, and he realizes that not only can the anti-Spawn follow him, he's already about to reappear, as we see a look of genuine fear on Spawn's face as he hasn't had time to regroup and he's not sure how he's going to defeat this attacker. Upon appearing, the anti-spawn wastes no time in once again pressing the attack as he lunges forward and unleashes another blast directly into Spawn's chest, this one doing a huge amount of damage as well, as we see all of the homeless men jump out of the way trying to protect themselves. As Spawn lands on the ground, he tries to get up and realizes that something is wrong, as he initially believes there's blood falling into his eyes, but then realizes that it's actually the costume itself starting to melt as he can hear it bleed, as he can see it bleeding, hear it moaning, and realizes actually for the first time that his costume is its own separate living entity and that it's been wounded. It's very much, a real turning point for Spawn in understanding more of his powers and the way to utilize said powers. Then the anti-spawn tells him, you don't you understand the pain? And then brings up an interesting point that the angels have set his soul on fire and that if he kills Spawn, they will let him rest, meaning that he is in unspeakable and excruciating pain in every moment of his existence as the anti-spawn, and that Wynn really is just doing this to try and basically get out of the clutches of the angels and be set free from this torment. Spawn looks down and sees just how much damage has been inflicted on his costume and realizes that if he doesn't do something, he is very much in danger of being killed. However, before Spawn can get his bearings, the anti-spawn unleashes a massive blast of energy directly from his face mask, which lights up the entire alleyway as it blasts a hole straight through Spawn's torso as Spawn collapses down onto the ground in a heap, unable to defend himself. We see the anti-spawn slowly approach, and this is a great image, by the way, where Greg actually took the time to draw the reflection of the alleyway in the golden metallic portion of the anti-spawn's mask, and also took the time to actually make it work with the curvature of his head. This is a really fantastic image, and I can't say enough how much I enjoy that Greg actually took the time to draw something like this when he didn't really have to. It's a really cool touch that I think adds a lot to the moment. We then see the anti-spawn state that, he's starting to not understand where he's at or why he's doing these things. He's starting to actually kind of lose touch with his humanity, but that he knows that he is Heaven's hunter and that Spawn is in fact his prey, as he creates a large energy type blade from his fist as he slowly approaches going in for the kill. On the final page of the story, we see this image of the anti-spawn standing over Spawn with his blade raised above his head, saying, "Time's up, Hellspawn," as he is prepared to deliver the final blow and hopefully for him end his torment and suffering while also defeating his unknown or mortal enemy that he doesn't even entirely know why it's his enemy. The next page is image info, which we've seen dozens of times at this point. It's just a blurb about upcoming image books, nothing special to see here. On the next page, we get to see this 2-page splash image of Spawn standing on a rooftop fighting against the Violator. And I have no idea who did this artwork. There's no signature that I can find anywhere on these 2 pages. And as far as I can tell, no credit is given to anyone throughout the pages of this book. So maybe someone here watching might recognize this artwork and know who did it, but I certainly don't. I still think it's kind of a cool image. It's not super detailed, but I think it does a very good job of, portraying Spawn in locked in battle with the Violator, especially given how big and imposing they made the Violator look. I like it. I just kind of wish I knew who was responsible for it. We then enter into the spawning grounds, which are overwhelmingly negative in this issue. Most of the letters that Todd chose to print in the spawning ground for issue number 17 are basically just trashing him, stating that they don't like the way he's been essentially, in their minds, attacking other creators, attacking other companies. And in reality, I think some of their vitriol is misplaced, as he states in a lot of the responses, you guys are reading 2 sentences from an hour-long interview, and, those are cherry-picked sentences that the journalist who printed that interview chose for a reason, and it was to create, conflict and a buzz, and to try and, essentially create a bit of outrage journalism. However, let's be honest, Todd's an outspoken guy, and he's never shy about hiding his opinions on matters. And, could he have approached things differently than he did? Yes. But at the same time, I don't think Todd's, super guilty of going too far in a lot of those matters. He never hides his opinions. He never hides whether or not he likes somebody. But at the same time, he doesn't go out of his way to vehemently attack people either, at least not to my knowledge, not that I've really witnessed. There is one letter that in particular stood out where someone wrote in complaining about the advertisement at the end of issue 10, which was an advertisement for some gay comic books. And, I stated in my video for issue number 10 that I felt it was really forward thinking of Todd to, print an ad like that, considering that at the time Marvel and DC would have never even considered it. But this guy that wrote in was very offended by it, and really for kind of dumb reasons. Basically, his whole thing was just how dare you acknowledge that gay people exist? And, Todd basically has a very well-written response where he essentially just tells the guy, hey man, it's not my job to tell people how to live, and it's not my job to judge people for the way that they live. And, there's no reason why you should be doing those things. And, gay people exist, and it's not going to hurt anyone to acknowledge that they exist. And honestly, he's right. There's no problem in, him printing up the ad for these comic books. Now, from what it looks like, there's probably for sure some material within the pages of those comics that would not be appropriate for children. But then again, Spawn's not exactly a comic book that I would say is super appropriate for children either, given the level of violence and gore in it. And so it's one of those things, if you're worried about young kids seeing that ad, you should be equally worried about young kids having Spawn in their collection in the first place, given, how much gore and, violence and over the top, just kind of sensationalized death that exists within it. So it just seems like an argument that really fell flat in terms of the guy who wrote in. It just kind of stuck out to me, and I liked the way that Todd responded to it. We then get 2 pages of Image fan art. Still something I think is super cool that Todd was printing in fan-submitted art, and especially now when he started to do it in color. Originally, he only printed up this stuff in black and white, and that was probably just due to budgetary constraints. But now you can see the stuff that you sent in printed up in full color in a nationally distributed comic book. I always thought this was something that was really cool to do for fans, and I kind of wish more comics did this. It's just something that I think really helps with your reader engagement and in keeping fans, interested in the product that you're putting out. We then see an advertisement for Savage Dragon number 8, which is an issue I have not yet made a video about, but will eventually. If you'd like to know more about Savage Dragon, check out my Savage Dragon playlist. We then see an advertisement for Bloodstrike. If you'd like to know more about Bloodstrike, check out my video on Bloodstrike number 1, where you will learn more about the rest of the Bloodstrike team, including Not Wolverine down here being more Not Wolverine than he's ever been. We then see an advertisement for Wizard Monthly, which is going to have a bunch of stuff in it, like a contest with thousands of prizes, Chromium Wildcats trading cards, a die-cut Kid Death and Fluffy bookmark, and then also an original Spawn Batman Jam cover by Todd McFarlane and Frank Miller, which is kind of cool. And on the reverse inside cover, we see an advertisement for Frank Miller's Sin City. And one of the biggest regrets I have in my years of collecting comic books is that when I did have the opportunity to buy the entirety of Sin City in single issues, I passed on it. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't have the money to buy it at the time. It was for sale from a vendor at a mall who was just kind of there for like a few months. And it was right after the movie had come out, so all the Sin City books had increased in price by quite a bit. And I don't even think the guy's price was necessarily unreasonable. It was just more money than I had. And unfortunately, I had to pass on it. And it still haunts me to this day. I would have loved to have owned the entire Sin City saga in single issues. And I could have made videos about it today. Unfortunately, my lack of funds prevented me from pulling the trigger on that decision. And if I ever get the chance again, it's probably going to cost me way more money than it would have then. And that was Spawn number 17. I have mixed feelings about this book. Like I stated, there seemed to be a lot of unexplained, I don't know if plot holes is the right word, but just places where the story, I felt, should have given us a little more information than it did about the inner workings of, what was going on with the angels and why the anti-spawn had to be created the way that they created it. And part of that just felt really weird and seemed like a lot of it didn't make sense. But one of the things I really like about this book is this is our first instance of ever seeing Spawn, for lack of a better term, getting his ass kicked. Up until this point, every time Spawn has faced an adversary, he has been doing so with little to no risk to his own safety. The most difficult challenge he's had up until this point was basically fighting Overkill. And, he kind of got beat up a little bit to begin with, but once he regrouped, he had no problem just completely destroying Overkill and, blasting him into smithereens. He, for as tough of an angel as she was supposed to be, he had really no trouble defeating Angela. Spawn overwhelming, and, Chapel, obviously, and, what threat did Chapel really pose to him, being that Chapel's just a regular guy with a knife? Spawn has been basically just this undefeatable heavyweight up until this point, and we're finally seeing him meet someone who is not even necessarily his physical equal, but possibly his physical better, and he's really got his back against the wall. I like it when, we get to see the hero be in a state of vulnerability where, the chips are down and he's potentially not going to win the battle, instead of just, steamrolling every opponent that he faces. But these are just my thoughts. Your thoughts may differ. If they do, it's cool. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.